Good evening and welcome to the show. First of all, I don't know if you could hear the announcer out there, because we couldn't hear the announcer on the stage here. They couldn't hear the announcer. Melanie, could you do me a favor? Melanie?
Yeah, John.
Could you rewind that and play it? So, I mean, you know, the Tonight Show, Johnny Carson has substitute hosts. Well, we can't afford substitute hosts, so we have a substitute announcer this week, and this was our production supervisor, our associate producer's big break, and we thought you should be able to hear the copy, and we couldn't hear it. Okay, play it again from the top.
Hey, why don't I tell them if they really want to learn something to watch John Barber's show tonight? Huh? Huh? I mean, John's got some weirder guests tonight than these guys put together. What do you think? Good idea, tell them.
Well, here we go again. Live from the KHJ studios in Hollywood, my old hometown, it's John Barber's live Friday night talk show. Tonight, John talks to director-producer Bill Jersey and shows excerpts from a documentary which shows how the Russians depict us and how we show what jerks the Russians are. John also talks to John Cassandra about why blacks shouldn't be called blacks anymore, but something else instead. And a biology professor hits the road in search of flattened fauna and crushed critters. He also takes us inside the mind of Ollie North. And now, here's a man who, like me, has one of the greatest minds in town. His wives are no-nonsense host, John Barber.
Welcome back. We just did that for two reasons: to show you that the KHJ technicians are not on strike, it's the NBC technicians who are not on strike, and to let you know that we know that that's the worst announcer we ever heard. But the reason we did it is because our production assistant is getting married in a couple of weeks and thought they could do the best Ronald Reagan in the world and needed the money. So we said, okay, Joyce. now listen, that announce was terrific for a woman. That impression was terrific for a woman, but unfortunately our production assistant is a man, but he still needed the money, so we let him do it. We got a piece of mail. As a matter of fact, we got a lot of pieces of mail here, and this is one that I thought I should run by you because it represents what a lot of people said during the week here. It comes from a woman named Sonia Lardner from Santa Barbara, California. Gee, I didn't know we went up that far. Dear John, I tried to get through on the phone last week to come to the defense of Angeline. I think she's adorable, and so does my husband. I am built like Angeline, and my husband has always told me that sex appeal is that mysterious, unknown quality possessed by women with big breasts. And by the way, would you please show us, if you can, what was in the box? You were off the air as you were opening it. Love and luck, Sonia. Okay, I forgot. I thought we had more time last week, and we ran out of time, and I was opening the box, and I thought the camera was going to be on this. So we'll show you what was in Angeline's box. Here we go. Oh, look at that. Hey, look at this. Letters from Ollie North. No, that is memos from Ollie. Now, here it is, what we got. Isn't it? It's a T-shirt with a hand-painted likeness of Angeline. Isn't that adorable? Angeline, thank you very much. I will wear it when I take my bubble bath. Thank you. That was very sweet of you. Now, speaking of Ollie North, you know, for 5 days now we've been watching the hearings. And probably the hearings would have only lasted 1 day if Brendan Sullivan, Ollie's attorney, and Ollie didn't whisper so much. And I guess, like you, I was sitting there watching them and wonder what those two guys are whispering about. I wonder what's really on their minds. So what I did is I took the first couple of days of hearings and I excerpted some of Ollie and Brendan whispering and sort of cut it out of context and dubbed in a voice or whispering of what they might be talking about. So these are my impressions of what perhaps was inside the mind of Ollie.
In certain communist countries, the government's activities are kept secret from the people. But that's not the way we do things in America, is it?
Hey, don't look now, but have you checked out that long-haired hippie's hairline? Huh? I mean, is that more part or more hair? It's worse than Bruce Willis, isn't it? You're right. It's worse.
That's not the way we do things in America, is it?
I'd love to use that dude for target practice. I don't know what country he's been living in, but how does he think we kept the Shah, Marcos, and Samos in power for so long? Probably got his law degree at Disneyland. If you want to drive a lawyer like that nuts, especially while the camera's on, ask him to keep repeating the questions, because he's probably forgotten it already. By the way, your Old Spice smells terrific.
Well, counsel, would you repeat that question again, please?
My question was, isn't it true that you shredded them?
You're right. I think it did throw him. What do you think they'd say if I told them I didn't shred any documents that came with orders from the president, only those that came from Nancy? And you know, they keep asking me about this stuff about documents put into the shredder, and they haven't asked anything about the documents we put in Fawn's pantyhose. By the way, what all did you put in her pantyhose? Read about it in the book.
Please proceed.
If I may, just 1 minute.
Does it sound like Senator Inouye's getting a little upset? Yeah, sure he's upset, because you're sitting here and you're coming across to a lot of people like a big war hero. You got this uniform on and a chest full of medals. Don't be surprised as the senator pops up and starts telling us about all the decorations he's gotten.
I'm a recipient of the Distinguished Service Medal of Intelligence. And last year, just before Mr. Casey went to the hospital, he presented me with the Central Intelligence Agency Medal.
Okay, I think it's time we get down to business, and you want to start answering some questions, but you want to come across like you're being honest and truthful, right? Okay, so what you do, first thing is you put on some glasses. It always makes people look like a wimp. Then secondly, address everybody as sir, whether you mean it or not. Now let's hear how sincere you can say it.
Sir.
Next question.
That wasn't too hard to swallow. Look, I know a lot of people have been spending time all weekend, wherever they are, talking about the hearings, and I'm sure you have some impressions of how Hawley conducted himself in front of those hearings. And let's chat about it a bit. The phone number here is 1-800-222-6652, and we'll be right back with your calls and comments. Good evening. Welcome to the show. Your name and comment, please. Yes, ma'am.
Am I on?
Yes, you are, sir.
I'm sorry, they told me I would be the second caller.
Your name?
My name is Kenneth Moss.
Yes, Kenneth.
My only comment is that I think it's very distressing that the majority of the country seems to be sucked in by this lieutenant colonel lecturing to the United States Congress on what foreign policy should have been and what he did to make it what he felt it should have been, rather than to implement what the Congress said we should be doing.
Kenneth, why did you use the expression sucked in? Do you think in using that expression, one almost gets the impression you feel that Ollie had the upper hand in dealing with the Senate?
I think that Ollie, so far, has whipsawed some very bright lawyers and some very bright congressmen and senators. I think that he's got a very good lawyer who has prepared him very well.
Well, Kenneth, truthfully, don't you think that perhaps sometimes Brendan looks like he's the one being prepared by Ollie? And by the same token, you know, frequently the stereotypical Marine is the GI who is following orders, and Ollie gives the impression that not only is a man who's obviously dedicated to his commander-in-chief, whom he called Joshua, his codename Joshua, but the fact that Ollie obviously could think on his own. And at one time he even told Senator Inouye that he had the ability to talk his superiors into doing things that they didn't wish to do. So in a weird way, doesn't it make you feel a little more comfortable that the Marines are not just order followers?
Well, it's a two-edged sword. If I were going into battle, or if I were professionally in need of someone to get a difficult operation done, I would go after an Oliver North. But that's not what that as a good Marine, he did what he felt was right. The problem is that he substituted what he felt was right for what the United States Congress, through the appropriations process and through the Bowen Amendment, decided was what United States policy was to be.
Well, Kenneth, that is what the hearings are going to go after, and I know that there's sort of a bandwagon effect riding on the popularity of how Ollie is coming across, but I think eventually, when that bandwagon effect does wear off, that history will be the final judge of how Ollie performed. Thank you so much for your call. Good evening. Welcome to the show. Your name and your comment, please.
My name is Randy Adams.
Yes, Randy.
I think that Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, for a man to be in charge of the Marine Corps, doing a job that he's doing, I think that somebody of his ability did it. Somebody basically had to do it and had to get around to the job of really going up there and not quite taking the upper hand, but had to do something. As I'm sure you probably noticed, that during the interviewing, these weren't questions that he's had prior. He had no prior knowledge of these questions.
Oh, I think you might be mistaken there. I have a feeling that Brendan Sullivan and a barrage of attorneys sat down with Ollie North over these last few months, and I think they had very extensive rehearsals because they had access to the same documents and maybe even more documents than the Senate committee had, and I'm sure that they were very well rehearsed, and Ollie was extremely well prepared, aside from the fact that he really could think on his feet. Thank you so much for your call. Good evening. Welcome to the show. Your question or comment, and your name, please.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hi, my name is Tom Dalton. I'm from the San Bernardino area.
Yes, sir.
I actually had the opportunity to serve with Lieutenant Colonel, well, he wasn't Lieutenant Colonel then, but in Vietnam. He was a very strange, peculiar guy. What he used to do was, some of the times when we got a little time off, we'd head into one of the local towns. It was very funny, actually. One of the guys would get on top of his shoulders and put on a big beige coat. So it looked like the guy was about 9.5 feet tall, and go into the big and tall stores, and he would call himself the Jolly Beige Giant.
Well, first of all, that doesn't strike me as being very strange. I mean, it strikes me as an incident that shows a little comic creativeness, because I'm sure that, I think Lieutenant Colonel North said he served in Vietnam in what, 68, 69?
Right.
What division was that with?
It was the 57th. Well, actually, he served in 2 different divisions.
Well, it would seem to me that being over there, the agony of being over there, the frustration, the disillusionment, the confusion would have required some kind of outlet and some kind of surcease. And I would imagine that was kind of a harmless prank.
Oh, I thought it was great. I thought it was fantastic.
Well, in what respect, then, did you think that Ollie was strange?
Well, he was kind of strange. I mean, most people in America wouldn't think that that was very, very usual for a commander over in the Vietnam War, where there were many people losing their lives, to dress up as a Jolly Beige Giant, as he used to call himself. But we used to walk in, and the top guy, as a matter of fact, I never had the opportunity to do it, but I was in one of the stores when he came in, and the guy on top would browse, and the guy on the bottom, who was Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, would grab some shirts, just take off with them once in a while, but he would ask the attendant in there, the guy who owned the store, would ask what's going on. And the guy on top would say, well, we're just browsing. Do you have any pants my size? I'm a 32 waist and a 94 inseam.
But your impressions of how the now Lieutenant Colonel is conducting himself in front of the Senate hearings?
Oh, he's fantastic. He always was a great speaker and a great motivator and just a great all-around person. There's no way he slept with his secretary or whatever the rumors were going around.
Well, thank you so much for your call. Appreciate it, and good luck to you. Good evening. Welcome to the show. Your name, your question, your comment, please.
Hello, my name is Rex. I'm calling from Monterey Park. I just wanted to say that, if we had to go to war, like a previous caller said, I'd want him right at my side. I vote for him for our next president. I think he's taking these hearings very good, and he's really calm, and he always has an answer for every question, and everything he's coming at is pretty good.
Well, thank you very much for your call. Good evening. Welcome to the show. Your name, your question, your comment.
My name's Keith.
Keith?
I'm from Corona, California. And,
yes, Keith.
I just wanted to say that Colonel Oliver North is doing a pretty fair job in the hearings. I spent 3 tours in Vietnam. I was assigned to OSI. I was over there and I saw a couple of orders that was signed by him at the time. But however, I think what it is somebody's looking for somebody for an scapegoat, and I think they're trying to pin it on somebody, and basically they're just trying to find out who they can put the finger on.
Keith, do you think that the president knew what was going on?
Basically, yeah. I seriously do, because in a way, he's got so many aides right now that, like I say, he's got a lot of aides. He can't tell exactly who's doing what to who.
Well, thank you, Keith, so much for your call. Thank you all for your calls, and we'll be right back after this to talk about Full Metal Jacket and see excerpts from an outstanding documentary called Faces of the Enemy. We'll be right back. Welcome back. If there's any one profession in this country that deserves to earn more money and get more pay, it's the teaching profession. And I know a lot of teachers who take odd jobs to earn a little bit extra money. Well, we heard about a teacher in Iowa who has one of the oddest extracurricular jobs I ever heard of, and it resulted in this book called Flattened Fauna, and this is the teacher.
Can be tough. Teaching at the college level can even be tougher. At the end of one of his tough days teaching or trying to teach biology to some semi-attentive students at Luther College in Dacor, Iowa, Professor Roger Knutson's escape is getting into his van, taking to the highways, and watching the real animals. Professor Knutson is an animal lover and a bird watcher, but his main passion isn't just watching birds flying in the trees or animals hopping on the road. His main passion is watching and identifying or trying to identify birds and animals when they're not flying or hopping on the road. As a matter of fact, his passion is identifying them when they're not moving at all. So much so that for others like himself, Professor Knutson has written a book that his students call The Professor's Guide to Road Pizza, but that his publisher calls The Guide to Flattened Fauna.
And animals are interesting, even in the kind of depleted state that you find them on the road. And knowing a little more about an animal, and the guide helps people know a little more about an animal. The guide is meant to be used at something close to highway speed. You've got about 5 seconds from the time you see something ahead of you until it's gone. And so the cues to identification presented in the guide are just a couple of critical things that you have to be able to catch quickly. If you see something on the road that's about, no matter what shape it is, that's about 1/3 red and about 1/3 black and about 1/3 white, it's a red-headed woodpecker. Doesn't make any difference what shape it's in. The amount of color is about the same. Another woodpecker, the yellow-shafted flicker, has got these yellow shafts, yellow centers of the feathers under the wings, and they're always visible on the road, no matter how the bird is arranged. They wind up being arranged in a lot of different ways, but few critical color things. The little puff of white-colored fur that's the tail of a rabbit, even after the rest of the rabbit might be scattered across a couple of lanes, that puff of fur all by itself is enough to identify the rabbit, even at 55 miles an hour.
The professor says another advantage to having his guide is that lovers of fauna, flattened or otherwise, at 55 miles an hour need to know the difference between the real two-dimensional critters and the look-alike pieces of rope, fan belts, shingles, and hunks of tire.
There's nothing wrong with it being entertaining. It's meant to be. There was a sparrow. We just passed a sparrow. Oh, good-looking sparrow. Wings out there. Looks like it was caught in mid-flight.
Professor Knudsen's reputation as the Marlin Perkins of the asphalt jungle has not only resulted in a surprising number of book sales, but in an amazing amount of fan mail.
These are a few things that people have sent me more than that I have gone out and collected. I picked up a couple of these myself just because they happen to be either something that was quite uncommon on the road and in a place where it was possible to get it without depriving anybody else of the opportunity to see it later on, things like that. But that, for example, that's a belted kingfisher. That's probably one of the rarer birds on the road because it's got to have you've got to have water nearby. They eat fish. You got long bill here that identifies it as a fish eater. That's a vole, probably one of the most realistic of the voles that I've ever found. This one came from a city street where there wasn't a lot of traffic and where it was safe to pick the thing up after a few days. And it's a really good example of just how flat and still identifiable something like that can be.
The professor is such an expert at analyzing crushed creatures, he can even frequently determine the sex, but not at high speed.
And it's more than that, a male painted turtle identified by the long claws on the front feet that tell you that it's a male. Snakes are among the more difficult things to identify on the road. Most of the time you really can't tell anything more than it's a snake, and even telling that it's a snake is something of a problem. This isn't so much a road animal as it is a parking lot animal. A common rat, actually usually referred to as a Norway rat. That's not an ethnic slur or anything. That's the name of it. In Latin, it's Rattus norvegicus, and this is particularly appropriate as a specimen. Flatter than most by a long ways. Got this hairless tail that characterizes a rat, and in this case, the whole thing has come to vaguely resemble the outline of the country of Norway, and so it's particularly appropriate that it should be have that name.
While Professor Knudsen continues to drive around Iowa, which looks like a squash squirrel, in his search for more flattened fauna to file into his folders, he leaves flattened fauna fans everywhere with another suggestion on how to enjoy mashed Mother Nature.
The challenge of taking a photograph, say, at 55 miles an hour that would serve as a positive identification that the animal was in fact there is something that would stimulate photographers, it seems to me. And they're easier to store. Photographs are practically the only thing flatter than the animals that are out there on the road already, so photographs are better.
I wonder what kind of grade his students give him. For almost 8 years, I was the film critic for Los Angeles Magazine. I always wondered why they called it LA Magazine, because every month there was an article about how to spend your time outside of LA. And for nearly 6 years, I was a critic at KNBC. Now, aside from the fact that I always wanted to do a show about real people, I stopped being a critic for 2 reasons. First of all, I didn't want to earn a living criticizing how other people earned a living. And after watching hundreds of films, I frankly was running out of original ways to say it was a piece of crap. But 2 weeks ago, I saw Full Metal Jacket. And it may have inspired me with some new ways to see it's a piece of crap, because Full Metal Jacket is. Now, if anyone other than Stanley Kubrick had made this film, I wouldn't even bother to talk about it, let alone see it. But up until a half a dozen years ago, Stanley Kubrick has been one of America's most original and vital filmmakers. And I say filmmaker as opposed to director. Alfred Hitchcock was a director, but he wasn't a filmmaker. A filmmaker is not only one who stands behind the camera, but one who sits behind a typewriter. In that sense, Alfred Hitchcock was to filmmaking what Agatha Christie was to literature, no more than an entertainer, albeit a very good one. Hitchcock was the Baskin-Robbins of mystery movies, giving us 31 different flavors of gore. Stanley Kubrick is a filmmaker, producing original work every time he rolled a camera and hollered action. Unfortunately, with his last film, Barry Lyndon, he must have forgotten to holler action because there wasn't any. Full Metal Jacket is the sequel. It is Barry Lyndon 2. Now, what was so frustrating and disappointing about it for me was that I wanted it to be good because I remember how good Kubrick used to be. I had the same feelings of almost anger that I had watching Richard Burton's last films. I remember Burton in the early days on stage and in films when he displayed the kind of awesome charisma, voice, and talent that would bring even Olivier leaping to his feet. But in his last films, he just did pathetic impressions of what he used to do. The motions and emotions were all the same. In Full Metal Jacket, Kubrick has become the Richard Burton of filmmakers. You can see the same endless long camera moves that were inspiring in Paths of Glory, but absolutely insipid in this Paths of Gory. The camera has to move because nothing else in the movie does. And if there's no motion, what is worse, there's absolutely no emotion. There's not one character we know or care about. The one character that might entertain us briefly is blown away a third of the way into the film. And the only real reason this character entertains us is because he uses profanity in such colorful ways. Next to him, Richard Pryor, Eddie Murphy, and Lenny Bruce would be considered pubescent pikers. The drill sergeant is played by a real drill sergeant, they tell me, and when he's gone, any hint of reality goes with him. When he goes, he's blown away by a chunky recruit, and at that moment, Kubrick has the actor portray insanity by having him do a very bad impression of Nicholson in The Shining, with a lowered head and the eyeballs rolling upwards, so much so that any moment you expect the guy to say, "Here's Jackie." Now, since there's no emotion in the film, you're not involved in the battle scenes. You're just the spectator, looking at a bunch of grown-ups playing their version of Cowboys and Indians, which is GIs and gooks. But you know what the battle scenes are really like? I saw the film with my son at the magnificent Odeon Theater Complex at Universal Studios. The battle scenes felt like one of the attractions on the tour stop, like the one they advertised for Miami Vice. Now, it would only be fair to tell you that the film got a lot of terrific reviews, but I was surprised by some of the good reviews the film got, except the one that Gary Franklin gave it, because, I mean, if an ounce of taste, intelligence, and talent were a mile of string, Gary Franklin wouldn't have enough to tie his shoelaces. I was surprised by the rave that Gene Siskel gave it. But then someone pointed out to me that Gene was only really half a critic without the fat guy sitting next to him. The only redeeming thing about Full Metal Jacket is that it came out after Platoon. Otherwise, it might have given Platoon in the Vietnam War a very bad name. My son and I spent more than $12 to see this, and what is frustrating is that I learned absolutely nothing. But recently, I saw for nothing a PBS documentary called Faces of the Enemy, made by director-producer Bill Jersey, that was worth more than the millions spent on Full Metal Jacket. And tonight, I'm going to show you some clips from it, and you're going to meet Bill Jersey. We'll be right back. This is the face of Bill Jersey, the producer-director who made this absolutely stunning documentary. It's a documentary that Oliver North said should be seen by all of mankind, and Bill has just recently produced a series of...
Oliver Stone, not Oliver North.
Oh, God.
But we could call him North. It's a little late in watching.
Maybe he'll see it and say the same thing.
Never
Isn't
know.
that funny? Oh, gosh. And you've just finished doing a series of documentaries for Peter Jennings and ABC.
And with Peter Jennings as host for KQED San Francisco.
And this was done originally out of KQED in San Francisco?
No, this was an independent production that KQED picked up after we'd completed.
But their logo was on the top of the show.
Yes, they're the presenting station.
Bill, how did you happen to make it? Why did you make it?
happened to make it isn't quite right. We thought about it. Dr. Sam Keene and I have been friends for years. And
who is Dr. Keene?
Dr. Keene is the author of the book Faces of the Enemy, which had the roots of the ideas for the show. It's not literally a translation of the book, but the basic ideas that were in the book are in the show. And we talked, as I think documentary filmmakers always do, about, well, what do you want to do, Charlie? And when he told me this idea, I was very trepidatious about it because it seemed very difficult. What we're talking about is intrapsychic experience. We're talking about what's going on in the mind of somebody. And I'm used to doing what are essentially called cinema verite documentaries, where you follow people, and they're story-oriented. They're not issue or idea-oriented.
Was this Sam's first time on camera?
Yes, it was.
Because he has a very remarkable and kind of gentle quality. Melanie, show this next little clip, which introduces the sound of Sam's voice and a little of Sam and some of his thoughts.
All nations use basically the same visual metaphors, the same hostile cliches to characterize and dehumanize their enemies. It's as if all these propaganda artists had gone to the same art school. The enemy is always a demon, a barbarian, the aggressor, a liar, a madman, or some vile animal that can be exterminated without regret. Before we make war, even before we make weapons, we make an idea of the enemy. Every society has its official images of the enemy. But how do these images affect the individual? Because it is always the individual who has to decide to kill. What takes place in the mind and feelings of an individual that allows him to kill an enemy?
Sam, in our society, of course, we depict, I guess, primarily the enemy of the Russians, or the Russian communists as opposed to the Chinese communists. And the ones who draw the images for us are the cartoonists. When you talk to some of the cartoonists, or when you and Sam talk to them, did they sometimes think that they were misleading the American public by drawing them as weird creatures?
Well, essentially what they said is that they use visual shorthand. And what are you going to do, as one cartoonist says in the film? If you draw a bunch of Arabs in a cartoon as men in business suits, which most of contemporary Arabs wear most of the time, you're not going to know they're Arabs. So you have to put them in what is the conventional Arabian costume. Or if you want to talk about somebody who's evil, you don't draw Gaddafi as a little white mouse, you draw him as a rat. So what they say is that they have to use this visual shorthand to get across the ideas they want to get across.
Well, some of the ideas are absolutely stupendous. And the confrontation between Sam and Vladimir, trying to articulate the fact that here are the Russians, I mean Vladimir Posner and Sam Keene, articulating the two mega giants confronting one another, was really an interesting confrontation. We'll take a look at that right after this break. We'll be right back.
That had to go to the Contras, he would have agreed with that.
Well, again, I don't think it's right to say directed. There were frequently times when General Secord would point out
would present Soviet leaders hold to the doctrine of traditional Marxism that eventually the world must be Marxist.
It is not that the world must be, because that would indicate some kind of active desire. It is that it will be, that it does not depend on what we want, that there are certain laws that govern the development of human society, I don't see why that worries anyone.
Yeah, that's what makes my blood run cold, and I tell you what.
But why does it worry you?
It's only a demythologized version of the guiding hand of the market or the manifest destiny. In other words, that's your God. That's
It's not
your
a
God.
God.
No,
But why do we talk about
it's not
laws
a God.
of nature?
Well, laws of nature,
That's okay.
it's inevitable. It's inevitable. In the inevitable movement of history, everything is destined to become communist.
Well, wait a minute. Do you or do you not believe that there are laws that govern the development of human society? That they do follow some kind of thing? Or is it totally chaotic?
Not that they're inevitable, no. I believe in human freedom.
It is my understanding that this is the way human society develops, and someday there will be a society when no one's going to be oppressed, when there will be no poverty at all, and finally when there will be no government at all. I have talked to American audiences, and I would say, could anyone in this audience tell me what communism is? It never happens. How can they fear what they don't know? Someone's told them it's to be feared.
Where I find ideals dangerous is the Soviets and the Americans are mutually making the world more and more bloody because each one supports a view of a certain inevitable process. You support what you call wars of national liberation wherever they pop up because you believe that the course of history is going to lead us inevitably toward a communist state. We support those that are more right-wing, more capitalist, because we believe that capitalism is a higher goal and a higher end for human beings. And in the name of these ideals, we make the world worse and worse instead of create any way in which we could exist.
Bill, was that the first time that Sam had ever confronted Vladimir Posner?
No, he'd met with Vladimir before. He'd met him in the Soviet Union when there was a conference they had there. But once again, as I said to Sam when he came out, you know, he lost again. They let the Russian beat him out.
Well, Vladimir is really slick. Somebody described him as the Russia's Ollie North, right? But when Sam was talking about the fact that these two megagiants, America and Russia, are making the world unpleasant for everybody else, that sort of really came to a boil, as it were, in Vietnam. The soldier that went back to Vietnam to visit the enemy afterwards, who was that?
Bill Broyles. Bill Broyles was, among other things, the former editor-in-chief of Newsweek. And we picked him because I felt, I think, maybe even more than Sam, that I wanted to get more experience in this film, that Sam has a great delight with ideas and loves to struggle over ideas with people, and I do too. But I really wanted to get someone who had some kind of an experience vis-a-vis war, but from a different perspective. And when we read Bill Broyles' book, Brothers in Arms, of his story about returning to Vietnam, we thought he's definitely the one we should talk to.
Well, let's just take a look at a brief clip of some of his comments when he went back to Vietnam. Melanie, could you roll that, please?
Part of that feeling of feeling trapped into having to see other human beings as abstractions is why I wanted to go back and try to find these guys now when the guns were silent and the war was over. I had to meet those enemies, not as abstractions, but as individuals, as real human beings. And I wanted them to meet me. And that maybe this way I could bring the war to an end. I could make some sort of personal peace. When I went back to my old battalion base and was sort of looking for it, I met a woman who was walking down the road, and I stopped and talked to her. And I said, well, what did you do during the war? And she said, well, I was with the Viet Cong in this village. I said, oh, well, what was that like? And she said, oh, it was very difficult. The Marines, this base, you know, they bombed us, they put out ambushes, but we prevailed. I said, well, I was here then. And she said, oh, very interesting. And then I said, are you married? And she said, well, my husband was killed in the war. And I said, well, when? And she told me that he was killed at exactly the time that I was patrolling through the village where he was killed. So I said, well, I might have killed your husband. My men and I might have killed your husband. And she didn't blink. She just looked back at me and she sort of smiled and said, but that was during the war. The war is over now. Life goes on.
You know, Bill, there were some really outstanding moments with his talking about his experience there, but he happened to mention that after he did meet the woman, he no longer had nightmares about Vietnam. We're going to take a break right now. When we come back, what I want to do is I want to show the experts at doing these kind of propaganda films were the Nazis, and we're going to show an anti-Semitic Nazi propaganda film and an American anti-Japanese propaganda film. Plus, we're going to see a clip of an American civilian who feels he's a soldier fighting the communists, and he went in and he killed 4 people in Washington State. And we'll be right back to see that.
Transportation for some of John Barber's guests provided by the Elegant Coach Company Incorporated limousine service.
The image of the enemy is not only the soldier's most powerful weapon, it's society's most powerful weapon. It enables people en masse to participate in acts of violence they would never consider doing as individuals.
Wherever rats turn up, they spread annihilation throughout the land, destroying property and food supplies. This is how they disseminate disease, pestilence, leprosy, typhus, cholera, dysentery. Just like the Jews among mankind, rats represent the very essence of malicious and subterranean destruction.
Welcome back. Bill, were you in the service?
Yes, I was in the Navy in 1945.
So you were in the Second World War.
Mm-hmm.
And I presume that you saw probably some American anti-Japanese propaganda films?
No, I don't remember it. Of course, I went over, actually, I have some in my souvenirs of my war experiences. I never even got into anything remotely battle. I have some cartoons that I drew that said, "Kill a Jap." And I have no memory that that's what my feelings were. So I probably saw propaganda and didn't remember it.
Well, let's take a look at one of the excerpts from one of the propaganda films that a lot of soldiers did see, and some civilians during the Second World War. Melanie, could you roll that one, please?
Is America. America, where we make war with machines, where we make justice for the soldiers of Japan who tossed Chinese babies on their bayonets. Justice for the soldiers of Japan who buried Chinese men and women alive, who tortured and starved and murdered American prisoners of war. Justice for these men who would be committing these same crimes today in San Francisco, Chicago, and Pittsburgh, New York, or any town. But America has the answer. Every forging kills a Jap. Every tank kills a Jap. Every gun kills a Jap. Have you killed a Jap soldier today?
When we were looking at that in the editing room, I mean, some of us were just absolutely shocked because we just, I mean, in this day and age, in 1987, it was hard to imagine that we had those kind of feelings. But Sam did bring out a point, and he said there were atrocities committed in the Second World War, and look what the Germans and the Nazis did, and look what the Japanese did. So weren't some of those, our propaganda films about them justified?
Well, if we describe the atrocities they did, they certainly were justified. But it was taking specific atrocities and generalizing from those atrocities, which meant that we created as they did us. They felt that they were, in attacking Pearl Harbor and attacking the U.S. in the Second World War, they felt that they were stopping this evil force that was heading toward them. We felt, or we proclaimed, that they were subhuman. And because we proclaimed that they were subhuman and they proclaimed we were subhuman, instead of ending the war, it was escalated into Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and millions of people were killed when we knew the outcome of the war. We knew the Japanese were going to lose.
You know, one of the really brilliant strokes that I think you did in the film, though, Bill, was that you reduced it to a single common denominator, which was the David Rice incident, because we are all subject to, we fall heir to the Cold War, so we're all subjected to the anti-Russian propaganda, even in peacetime. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to show this brief clip, and it's a continuing thread throughout the show. Melanie, could you show this clip for us now, please? The personal thread woven through the documentary is the story of David Rice, who on Christmas Eve 2 years ago broke into a home in Washington and butchered a young couple and their 2 children because he heard they were commies and he was a Christian soldier.
Like I said, it was war. War is war. I don't know what can I say? I think I probably had about the same sentiment as any other soldier. You know, hey, I don't like to kill, but sometimes it can't be avoided.
It wasn't a war. It wasn't a war, and nobody appointed you, and you weren't a soldier.
I was, and I still am.
Welcome back. Bill, if it runs again on PBS, you must watch it. Melanie, what I would like you to do is I'd like you to cancel the last piece of tape for the closing. I'd like you to run the next piece of tape because David Rice said he was inspired by a general that you happen to have on camera. Over credits, I'd like you to start running the piece of tape now, Melanie, and then run our credits over it, and if we have to go 30 seconds over, we go 30 seconds over. Thank you very much, and Bill, congratulations. It was absolutely outstanding.
Thank you.
I guess you could say that I was sort of a Paul Revere type of a character. You remember old Paul was the guy that was supposed to have ridden that night shouting, "The British are coming, the British are coming." My message is a little bit different tonight. It's the communists are coming, the communists are coming. In fact, the communists are already here.
Our churches today are full of a bunch of spiritual retards with a bunch of brain flushers for preachers, and they haven't figured out that this thing is for real and that we are in a war.
I'm still concerned, see, your talk and your rhetoric, like, this is war, we are at war. And, you know, I think, for instance, of one recent tragic event that David Lee Rice killed, as you know, 4 people in Seattle, and he says that one of the influences was your work. Do you think there's any responsibility for some people to think that we should have a violent solution to this problem?
I don't think you could find anything in any of my literature that put out that would have the effect that that man said that it had on him. Whether he was using that as an excuse, I don't know. But I can't, and these gentlemen have all read my material, I can't think of anything that I have ever said at any time that would give anybody an idea that they should go out and commit violence.
Talking about we are at war, yes, we are, and the type that we have described, and it's been said over and over, is that it is a spiritual war. It is that because in the spiritual war is whether do we believe in the Word of God or do we not believe in the Word of God.
There's no discussion, folks. His word is established forever. I'm not going to discuss it. If he says murder gets murdered, if a murderer gets murdered or slain, capital punishment, that's fine with me. Line them up and we'll clean up our nation overnight. Start with the abortionists. Might as well get rid of a few of those beasts.
I guess the bottom line is if this country were going just great, if it were going like it was in the early days when they followed the laws of God, when a murderer was executed, a homosexual was executed because God tells us to do that, and this country was blessed in that era.